It is always good to have assembled before me the leaders of the institutions and machinery of the state as we prepare for the inevitable, naturally occurring 2025 Atlantic hurricane season. This is now my 10th. This is now my 10th such meeting to mobilize and help to develop within the leaders the frame of mind to get ready in the event that we are actually hit by a weather event in the Atlantic hurricane season. June 1 is not just a notional date. It is for policymakers, practitioners, politicians, bureaucrats, public and civil servants, members of the security forces, our teachers and nurses, our local government practitioners, our journalists, our civil response and emergency response, essentially all Jamaicans. June 1 is an important marker on the calendar. It is the beginning of the hurricane season. And so what we are gathered here to do is not just ceremonial, it is of real impact. And so that is the first kind of base attitude that must be set in determining and establishing the state of readiness and the frame of mind. That the calling together of this committee is of real importance. It is a signal to the machinery of the state that we are now officially in this season of risk and threat, and we must all now adopt a mindset of readiness. Disasters are no longer distant or occasional threats. They are increasingly becoming frequent, more intense, and more complex. From earthquakes that destabilize entire regions, to wildfires that erase communities, and you would have seen recently a landslide, a glacier in Switzerland that totally wiped out a community. These are disasters that are now happening more frequently, and their impacts are significant. You would have seen, obviously, the wildfires in California that totally wiped out communities. The global disaster risk landscape is evolving at a pace that challenges the traditional models of preparedness and recovery. For small island developing states like Jamaica, one extreme weather event is enough to undo years of hard-earned economic progress. And with climate change accelerating, these will only grow more disruptive. I want to elucidate this point a bit. We are accustomed to seeing weather events that could be considered once in 50 years in terms of its occurrence. But in the last 20 or 30 years, we're seeing weather events that would normally occur once in every 50 occurring, sometimes as many as 1 in 10. So you're seeing these major events occurring every decade, and maybe even more often than that. And so we have to be prepared. The level of preparedness that we have cannot be the level of preparedness where you're expecting a 1 in 50 year return. You have to be at the level where your preparedness is, let's be prepared because it could happen every year. That's the level of preparedness that we will have to have. The level of disruption as well is far more significant because of the interconnectedness and complexity of our society. So one weather event can trigger not just displacement of citizens because they have lost their homes. You're going to now have to look at the health situations that can follow, the law and order situations that can follow, the impact on the other areas of the economy, particularly those that are directly related to agriculture, the impact on trade because of the dislocation of supply chains. So it becomes very complex. So the preparedness of the nation is not just about being able to conduct a humanitarian exercise when a disaster hit. All right? You have to now be prepared to deal with the energy crisis that could come, the trade crisis that could come, the impact on the economy in terms of inflation when goods get scarce, the citizen safety and security issues that could happen, all elements of any consideration as to the stability of the society must be considered in preparedness when such disasters strike. We have long accepted the undeniable link between poverty and disaster vulnerability. Those with the least often bear the greatest burden. And that is an absolutely true statement. It is the poor that is most affected by disasters. So when we are planning our preparedness response, we must be thinking about, first and foremost, who are the most vulnerable and who are the persons without means to be able to recover on their own. So that must be a prime consideration in our disaster recovery. So I'm speaking to many heads of agencies and entities here. So if it is a matter for the local government to consider in your constituencies and in your various localities, which community is going to be impacted, not just by the weather, not just by a flood, but from a socioeconomic standpoint. Which community do you need to have stocks and resources pre-positioned and prepared to respond to? You have to be planning for that. If it is the Ministry of Labor and Social Security, you have to be thinking, how are you going to get resources to those persons who are on the PATH program and who would depend on your PATH checks? How are you going to get things to them quickly? Again, in the Ministry of Local Government, for those people who you have to take care of who are in the various infirmaries and homes, how are you going to have those resources because they are not in a position to help themselves? So, as Prime Minister, I've made it a national priority to mainstream disaster risk management into every tier of governance and every corner of our society. From land use planning and infrastructure development to climate adaptation and community education, we are building a culture of resilience that is data-driven, locally grounded, and globally informed. Let us begin with the facts. According to the International Displacement Monitoring Center and the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, over 20 million people are displaced every year by climate-related disasters. These are not just numbers. Behind every statistic is a family torn apart, a child out of school, a community forced to start over. The economic toll is staggering. The cost of rebuilding cities, rehabilitating survivors, and restoring services, these costs can reach billions of dollars. So in light of this, Jamaica has adopted a multi-pronged strategy to reduce risk, respond effectively, and build forward stronger. Our approach includes strengthening national institutions and legislation, and I'll speak about that a little later, investing in science, technology, and early warning systems, building capacity at the community level, aligning national planning frameworks with climate resilience, and ensuring that disaster risk reduction is cross-cutting, touching education, housing, health, infrastructure, energy, and the environment. We have also advanced the review of our national disaster risk management framework, and we are developing a new policy to ensure we are fit for purpose. One of our greatest assets in disaster management is communication. Thanks to our partners, including the government of Japan through JICA, we now have a robust national disaster emergency telecommunication system and public safety network. These allow us to disseminate real-time alerts, mobilize response teams, and reach even our most remote communities in times of crisis. But while we have made progress, we must be honest about where gaps remain. Now, following the devastation of Hurricane Beryl last year, we established the Disaster Risk Management Review Committee to assess our disaster preparedness and response efforts in the aftermath of the hurricane with a view to learning from the experience and strengthening our readiness and response to both natural and man-made hazards. The committee was chaired by Major General Anthony Anderson and comprised distinguished experts, including Dr. Paris Leahy, Ms. Trudy Deans, and Mr. Jonathan Brown, and I want to thank them for their work and contribution. Ms. Deans is here representing the committee. The committee undertook a comprehensive review of our disaster framework, identifying key vulnerabilities and priority areas for reform, from ODPEM's leadership role and the structure of that organization and its current state of leadership, and community preparedness, another critical element, specifically now looking at the various local government committees and community response organizations, to disaster financing, the role of the Ministry of Finance with the buffers created in our budgets and the insurance that we have signed on to. We looked at infrastructure resilience, specifically looking at the work of the NWA, the NWC, JPS, and we also examined the use of technology. And that, I'll say a few words on the use of technology a little later on in my presentation. While Jamaica has made significant strides in early warning systems, again, that is to be noted, and we, again, give our appreciation to the government of Japan through JICA for assisting us with the establishment of an emergency communication system. We have structured planning, particularly in the Ministry of Finance. I don't think anyone could complain about the speed at which the Ministry of Finance responded with the resources. I certainly didn't hear any complaints from the Minister of Labor and Social Security. I didn't hear any complaints from the Minister of Education. The response was swift. And I didn't hear any complaints either from the Minister of Local Government, except to say they want more. But I think the Ministry of Finance should be commented. I don't think the country would immediately associate the Ministry of Finance with disaster preparedness and response. But, you know, that is where it starts. If you don't have an economy, then you're going to be relying on other people to help you recover from your disaster. And I want to say as clearly as I can, what has changed in Jamaica in the last decade is that we are able as a country, right, with God's protection and blessings, we have been able to stand on our own 2 feet and respond effectively to disasters. That's a national achievement. And that is because we have run the economy well. So not only can the economy nyam, the economy can drink, the economy help you to recover from disaster. Right? The economy. So, but there are issues. We were spared the worst in our recent disaster, Hurricane Beryl. And being at the forefront of the response, I saw the gaps. I saw the potential threats. And what the role of leadership is, it is to ensure that even though you escaped the worst, you don't just sit back and say, it's past. You have to strengthen the institution so that if there were to be a return of the threat, you can genuinely be able to stand up to it. So there were some gaps. For example, we must improve the resilience of our utilities. The JPS must undertake a comprehensive review of its distribution network and replace those compromised and broken poles, and as quickly as possible, replace those that are needed to be replaced with concrete poles. Now, I know that they have started that work. There is a budget, a capital allocation for that, and that work must proceed right throughout the year with great speed and alacrity, so that, God forbid that there is any other disaster to come, that we are not without electricity in those areas for any extended period of time. And I know that the JPS is addressing that, but we must say it publicly, and we must hold them to account for it, to move very swiftly in ensuring that the distribution network is resilient and resistant to these weather events. As we examined the operations of the NWC, clearly, except for gravity-fed systems, once the electricity is out, then the entire country would be out of water. So the NWC has to develop independent power sources. It has to have its own backup strategy, its own backup capability. And so the government has started work towards ensuring that the critical areas for supply and distribution, that those pumping stations will have backup generators. That's a long-term objective, but we're going to ensure that we at least have some short-term capabilities. And it is a two-pronged strategy. One strategy is to solarize some of the pumping stations that we have so that we have independent power. And the other strategy is to introduce generators that can carry the pumps for a reasonable period of time should there be a failure in the electricity utility. And we have started that recently. In the Red Hills area, we opened a solar plant at one of our pumping stations, which will help in the event of a natural disaster, providing those panels aren't blown away, they remain firmly anchored. Then they would be able to generate electricity and keep those pumps going. Housing. The housing sector is growing rapidly in Jamaica. And the experience of Hurricane Gilbert would have seared into the minds of Jamaicans the importance of putting on their roofs following the guidelines of the building codes. So a lot of Jamaicans would have moved away from zinc roofing to putting on concrete slabs. But we noticed that, and flying over the areas that were impacted by the recent Hurricane Beryl, and just looking at some of the roofs, and then when we went on the ground and examined, it was clear. Those roofs that did not use hurricane straps, those were the roofs that were destroyed. It was crystal clear. So it appears to me, and indeed coming out of the report, that the parish councils, the approval entities, and the Ministry of Local Government, through a national public campaign, must reinforce the building codes as it relates to roofs and the need to build according to code and use, in particular, hurricane straps to secure our roofs. But roofs were not the only areas of housing that were damaged. Windows. Many persons suffered water intrusion because of the kinds of windows that they used. And so there may have to be some guidance on that as to how to secure your windows during hurricanes and the types of windows to use to secure your homes during hurricanes. We also found that the houses that were particularly affected by the disaster, and again, this is not rocket science, were the houses that were built in areas that were known to be disaster prone. So people who built in the swamps or close to swamps, who built on the gully banks or close to the gully banks, who built on unstable slopes, those were the houses that were most affected. People who built in areas that are known for flooding. So, in a sense, Minister Mackenzie, we already know where the damage is going to take place. We will have to strengthen our settlement policy, our enforcement as it relates to where people settle and how they settle. And there are communities that are there for years, for decades. It's going to be very difficult to move them. You ask them to move, they don't want to move. They're emotionally connected to the community. But my own view is that if you know you're going to build in an area that is prone, the technology to build and build as safely as you can exists. In other communities, in other jurisdictions where you're building in low-lying areas, people build on stilts. They make provision for that because they know there's going to be a flood. They try to avoid building near the canal or the gully. These are just simple things that we can do. And our entities that are responsible for enforcing and responsible for building standards, these are things that we're going to have to look at and enforce, but at the same time, encourage and help people to build wisely. Now, we know this is a very sensitive discussion because immediately the thought will come to mind, the government is trying to move me or displace. I think we need to move away from that because that's absolutely not what the government is trying to do. The government is trying to make you safe. And so the attitude must be one of, let's cooperate with the authorities to see how we can be safe in these areas. Because the truth is the government can't relocate everyone all at once. We simply don't have the capacity. But for those that are in the extremely dangerous positions, if the government comes to you and says, listen, if there's a heavy rain, this slope is going to go, as we have done in an area called Wees Road, in East Rural St. Andrew, where we have gone to people to say, all right, we'll help to relocate you. And they say, no, we'll stay. Some have accepted, and a few have decided that they will stay. I pray every day that nothing more happens and we don't have to send in the JDF and other response entities to try and keep those persons safe. But it is the reality. So I'm hopeful that the nation listening today and those people who know that they are in the disaster-prone areas, that the mindset needs to change, and maybe you need to start to approach your parish council or your member of parliament to say, can we start a process to either help build my resilience, improve the strength and structure of my home, or see how we can be relocated? I think that has to be the mindset now, given that you're going to have greater frequency and greater intensity of natural disasters that will affect your habitat and your home. Now, we must accelerate the expansion of early warning systems. And the government has been investing heavily in that. The Ministry of Economic Growth has been investing in that. We've recently installed a Doppler radar system and other systems right across Jamaica. We note that there is some pullback from NOAA in the United States. So we are going to have to make our own investments to ensure that we have enough early warnings should there be any disasters. And that is something that we're doing, and we will continue to increase our own capacity and indeed cooperate with other regional entities so that we have the information through early warning systems. Given the increased threat of sea level rise because of the climate change issues, we are going to have to take coastal protection much more seriously than we did in the past. Coastal protection is an expensive undertaking. Expensive. And I can tell you that a few weeks ago, I was in Southeast St. Mary looking at a coastal revetment project that was executed by JSF and the PIOJ, sponsored by the World Bank through a loan. And it was probably about 1 kilometer of revetment, and the cost was significant. But the way to think of it is that if we didn't do that revetment, and there was a supervening kind of weather event, it would have destroyed the single road connecting one end of the island to another. So you'd have to think about what would be the economic cost of not being able to come from Kingston through Junction, because that stretch in Anoto Bay, that road was totally destroyed. And that's how we have to think of it. We have done revetment works in downtown Kingston along Port Royal Street, and we have done some other revetment works in Montego Bay, particularly to secure the major investments that we have made in the Harmony Park. And that was several $100 billion of building revetments and other sea protection. So this is something that, Minister of Finance, you're going to see more calls on the budget for revetment works, seashore protection, because without that, it's not just the loss of landmass, but because of our historical settlement patterns where most of our townships are close to the sea and sometimes at or below sea level, these are things that we're going to have to take seriously in the future. The agricultural sector, I must say that I was very impressed with our farmers in Clarendon and Manchester and St. Elizabeth in that belt, that they recovered very quickly. They were hit badly, but they recovered very quickly, and they Ministry of Agriculture was very quick to be in the field with the farmers doing the assessment. So I think we should give them commendations. The response was financial, but they did get some supplies, and I think we're going to have to kind of strengthen our response there to see how best we can help farmers, especially those that are utilizing grow houses like greenhouses and other covered agricultural technology. They suffered badly because of the damage to their greenhouses. So there needs to be, greater outreach and education as to how to dismantle, how to protect, and whether or not there are actually technologies that are available that could be deployed to secure greenhouses in the event of these kinds of disasters. Again, let me say that the Ministry of Finance did well in terms of the mainstreaming of disaster risk in the whole financing process, whether it is through insurance, setting up buffers. And when we speak in this language of buffers and insurance, the average person may not immediately see why that is important. For decades before, we had established a disaster fund, and there was literally nothing in the disaster fund. But what this administration has done in the last decade is that every year we set aside a certain percentage of the budget and we place it in the disaster fund. So when we were hit by Beryl, there was a certain portion of the disaster response that we could fund immediately without having any fiscal impact, meaning without having to go and borrow or not spend on something in order to spend on the disaster response. And then we purchased some insurance, which were we able to call on that? Some of the CRIF, right? We called on the CRIF, and then we participated in a very innovative financing arrangement called the catastrophe bond. We didn't call on that because it didn't reach the parameter to trigger the call of those funding. But if it did, we would have it. So we have what is called a multi-layered response. In other words, we can respond out of our own resources that we saved, we can respond out of insurance that we bought, and we can respond out of a very innovative financing instrument called a catastrophe bond. And because of that, the citizen who is displaced can expect to get response from the government fairly rapidly. Now, at that point, I wish to make an appeal to every Jamaican. There is an expectation that in a disaster, the government would be at liberty to suspend or ignore the rules as it relates to how it disburses public resources. So for the citizen in distress to ask for identification, you might be saying, my house blew down, all the documents lost, why you coming to ask me about ID and so forth. After disaster has passed and it goes to the committee of parliament, it is the same citizens who are going to say that, and represented by their parliamentarians, that the government gave grants to people who didn't exist. It's the same criticism is going to be leveled at the government that, we are not following the rules and that there is some corruption somewhere. So we can't suspend the rules we understand the situation that you are in, but as you live in this democracy, with the rules and laws that we have, you also need to prepare for a disaster by doing a couple of things. Firstly, your ID may be a physical document. Protect that. Put that in a safe place. Put it in a Ziploc bag. You know, if you have to keep it on your person, protect it. But your ID, in a sense, is also digital and not exclusive to you. Well, it's exclusive to you, but it's not held by you alone. So, for example, if you have your TRN number and you are able to tell us what your TRN number is, we can go and check to verify that, oh, this is a TRN number, and then we can go through a process of verifying who you are. So in other words, the loss of your TRN number does not mean you've lost your identification, because that's backed up somewhere in a safe database. So you need to be able to, if you can, memorize, but have copies of it. Keep them, those physical representation of your ID, in a safe place. That's number one. Number two, we are not going to be able to give out the response, recovery grants, and so forth without conducting some form of assessment first. So, you know, I've met people who come and say, Prime Minister, my house mash up, I'm going to get nothing. And I would say, all right, have they come to assess your house? No, me not see nobody yet. But you don't need to assess nothing, Prime Minister. See the house they mash up. Well, I am not the qualified assessor. So somebody has to literally come and check, because in a disaster, there are persons who will say, which we have situations where the social workers go out and somebody come and says, my house, this, you know, and see it mashed down there, and take the person's number. And then when that person comes home from work now, the social worker is already gone. And then, you know, they go to the ministry to say, I live at X address, and I heard you came by, but you didn't see me. And when the social worker checks the address, they say, no, but I came there and somebody claimed your benefit. So all kinds of shenanigans can happen in a disaster. So we must ensure that the systems of accountability continue to work even in a disaster. And as citizens, you can play your role by being informed and having your identification at hand. That's very important. As I move around the country, I do get the complaints that I haven't gotten yet, or they have assessed and I haven't gotten yet. I have applied and I haven't gotten yet. And when I check with the Ministry of Labor and Social Security and the other entities, many problems. Names are incorrectly spelled. The TRN numbers are incorrect. All kinds of issues with identifying. The phone numbers are not right. All kinds of issues. So as you know, your responsibility, your duty to help yourself as a citizen is to make sure that your details are correct, so that it helps with the speed of the response. Now, as I shift from that to look at the humanitarian and the relief responses, we found that there were many challenges there from the report. The first challenge is that the lead in the humanitarian response, certainly in terms of the assessment, would be the Ministry of Labor and Social Security. And they would need to have persons who are trained, social workers, to do this. We didn't have enough, because it meant pulling your social workers from their day job, their normal duties, to now go and transition into a disaster response function, which some of them may not be trained in, some of them may not have had experience in. And indeed, it is a very intense kind of operation. Some of them don't have the gears to do it, and some of them are victims of the disaster themselves. So what that caused was a delay in the response. And even if the response was mounted, it took a long time to reach to persons who needed it. So we're going to have to rethink how we create a body of assessors who can be easily mobilized with training, that should a disaster strike, we can mobilize them rapidly and have them in the field quickly and extensively, so that the citizen does not have to wait too long before a representative of the state reaches out to them. Now, the Jamaica Defense Force is the repository, let me put it another way, is the backup for everybody else in this regard. And the challenge is how to get all the entities that have prime responsibility, first responsibility for the disaster relief and the humanitarian relief to coordinate effectively with the resources of the JDF. And so these are some protocols that we have picked up that needs to be worked out to ensure that we are in the field quickly and that we are responding quickly to the response. The other issue that we faced was we did not have a unified database of persons who were affected by the disaster. So what you found is that you could very well have duplication of effort. So someone could get a benefit from the Ministry of Labor and Social Security, get a benefit from ADPEM or some other entity giving, and then go to the what we call the Food for the Poor, for example, who would go to the non-governmental entities that are also on the field of response. So we are looking at setting up a kind of centralized database where, at least in the first instance of the response, everybody can get at least once. Because what you find is that it is those citizens who are in the know and who are connected who will get 2, 3, 4, 5 times, while someone who is not in the know, not properly identified, not connected, gets nothing, but is out there being very critical of the system. That, see, nobody don't care about me. When that's not really the case. It's just how the system is organized, or rather not properly organized. And so one of the things that we're going to have to do is set up this kind of central database, which then leads me to the issue of technology. The Ministry of Labor and Social Security, the Ministry of Local Government, two prime entities we must embrace technology, certainly in terms of the digitalization and the establishment of the central database. That's absolutely critical if we're going to be able to distribute the humanitarian and recovery support in a quick and timely fashion. So that is something that we are working on and coordinating. But as I flew over the damaged areas the day after the hurricane hit, I had my notepad, and as I was flying over the coast, I was just marking one roof, and then strokes, that's 5. In other words, I could do a rapid assessment just by flying over. And I suspect that the JDF does that and with their aerial capabilities. But there are far more efficient technologies using artificial intelligence that can scan areas and tell you which roof was damaged, the extent of the damage, and then you can use that data to make assessments as to how much should be assigned to persons. So in other words, the on-the-ground social worker coming to knock on your door and look, that effort could be enhanced greatly by the deployment of disaster assessment technologies using the available technologies through drones and artificial intelligence, which would give you rapid assessments, which would help to speed up the process of response. So this is something that we recommend strongly to the Jamaica Defense Force, the ADPEM, Ministry of Local Government. That capability needs to be integrated into our disaster response. So our telecommunication providers. Now, generally, I think Jamaica has a very robust telecommunication infrastructure. It has served us well. It has carried us through storms and are back up relatively quickly. But we have seen where they are vulnerable to criminal activity, particularly the theft of fuel, the theft of generators, the theft of copper and fiber, and sometimes even the repeaters. So that is a significant vulnerability. I know they have invested heavily in trying to secure the equipment that keeps the network running, but I think that the government must now create special legislation to place special harsher penalties on those persons who prey upon these critical infrastructure. Now think about it. Someone goes and steals, 50 gallon, 100 gallon of fuel. That repeater cell site goes down. The person who steals, gets whatever he gets. I don't know how much they get for that fuel. They probably sell it at half price. But everybody else is without. The commerce that doesn't get to go through, right? Somebody in an emergency need to call a hospital or get some emergency service. That one thief would have put an entire community at risk. And we cannot treat it as, him just thief some fuel. That level of thinking in our society where we make excuses for these kinds of acts, we must take that out of our mind. His act is not stealing from the telecommunication company. He's stealing from you. He's taking away your security and your safety. It is a criminal act against essentially a public service. And the level of punishment for that should be stronger for a greater deterrent effect. And so we are examining the legislation to improve that. So I think I've taken up a lot of your time in telling you what we're going to do, or what we have started, where the gaps are, and how we are correcting it. But I close by reinforcing the need for us to be on a footing of readiness. To say to you that we have seen the gaps, we know what the gaps are, which is the best thing, to be aware of what the gaps are. We have not been hit by a really, really serious hurricane for, maybe before Beryl, maybe 20 years or so. So we have not really had that kind of experience. We've been going through the kind of dry runs and practice runs. But because, our systems have become more complex, and we have not necessarily tested all of the systems, there are gaps. But the good thing is that we did the review, we are aware of what the gaps are, we are moving to correct them, and even if there were to be an event, we know how to change, how to move, how to maneuver, and what to be prepared for as we put in place the institutions to permanently close those gaps. So, in closing, the NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration of the United States, has projected up to 19 named storms this season, with up to 5 potentially becoming major hurricanes. So the question is not whether a storm will come, but whether we will be ready. Preparedness saves lives, preparedness protects progress, and preparedness shortens recovery. So I want to leave you with this. Building resilience is about empowering our people, strengthening our systems, and preserving our development gains. We must not only bounce back, but we must bounce back higher, and we must bounce forward. So let us commit today as a united council, as a nation, to continue building the Jamaica that can withstand any storm, one that does not crumble under pressure, but rises stronger each time. Together, let us lead, prepare, adapt, and protect. Together, let us build a disaster-resilient Jamaica. Thank you for choosing Jamaica.